When you first open this case, you might just think, hey, that's a regular Les Paul. We've seen a lot of these. But no, the history runs deep. Welcome back, troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. This one comes to us from the year 1983. That is very significant for Gibson because that is when they started to do reissues again. However, it wasn't right away. There were a lot of things that predate the Les Paul reissue, such as custom-ordered guitars for dealers like Jimmy Wallace, the Leo's Les Paul reissues, as well as the Strings and Things, and other special one-offs. And the one we're talking about tonight actually falls within those dealer reissues. This was a Japan exclusive run that launched in late 82 and lasted until early 1983. Now, the easiest way to identify one of these is by its serial number. On a reissue style Gibson, you generally don't have letters in it. It looks like this, 9-XXXX, because the 9 tells you it's a 59 reissue, 8 tells you it's a 58, 0 means 1960 reissue. However, if you're talking in the 80s, in the prehistoric era, a 3 in this position would tell you it's an 83, a 7 would be 1987, etc. What on earth is N? The country that we call Japan, there's also other names for it, such as Nihon and Nippon. Both of those roughly translate to the sun's origin, the land of the rising sun, source of the sun, etc. But if you want to know what the N officially stands for on this run, it's Nihon. Because occasionally on guitars that went to Japan, they would have a special decal placed on the outside of it just above the volute area. It would say Gibson authorized instrument, have their Norland era logo, and then right below it, Nihon Gibson. So if you ever see that in the wild, yes, that's legit. But not every Japanese Gibson got that. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if that was just a specific dealer that applied those. So you might be asking, how do I know this is an 83? Well, we'd have to go by pot codes, or maybe we'll find a serial number in the lipped ridge of our control cavity. However, I reached out to Randy Leonard, who built many of these guitars, and here's what he had. 10 different serial numbers ranging from December of 82 till about mid-1983. And it's always been assumed that there were about 100 or so in this run, and that seems to line up with what was in his records. But remember, Randy was just one guy. He didn't build them all. Just because my serial number's here, that's not suspicious. However, what was interesting is in his notes, they're all labeled as CSE, which means it would have the Custom Shop Edition decal. Many of the ones I've seen in the market do, but yeah, somebody messed up on this one, I guess. Unless the blacklight test tells us something else. I had first learned about the Nihon run through Mike Slabowski. He has this great article of the road to 59, going through a bunch of models that helped birth my interest in learning about all these. And ever since, I've always wanted to document one just to see, now, is there anything else weird and quirky about them? I mean, at face value, this looks very similar to some of the early 83 prehistorics. I mean, it's got the proper ABR1. It's got my favorite Gibson knobs on it with thumb bleeders. I'm hoping we still have the Tim Shaw PAFs in here. And the top on this one is just fantastic. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, I have not cleaned this yet, and I would not necessarily say it's a fantastically well kept and preserved guitar, but just look at how that flame top is dancing here. That is some really premium grade maple. This is also exciting because this is the era when people like Yamano Music got their reputation for only accepting the best of the best. And this is a great top. But technically, I would categorize the Nihon run as a prehistoric. So we can look past things like the old Gibson logo because they hadn't nailed stuff down yet. These still have the Made in USA stamp. And it's got a neat stamp serial number, but it doesn't have like the right format. So it's like getting close there. But we've certainly got the thin binding in the cutaway. But if you're curious where I got this one, surprise, surprise, I pulled it out of Japan last July. And it's been featured in like 7 different episodes. This poor thing has been waiting for its review, and today is the day. So let's finally get this one thrown onto the workbench to take an individual look at its parts and specs while we get it cleaned up. Here we are after an hour and a half of cleaning. It's got that beautiful wet look now, and yep, that top dances even more. But I only ran into one surprise here that wasn't so good, but let's start with our pickups. The neck is a Tim Shaw from 1983, dating to January, and our bridge is the same, so that's a miracle. Tim Shaw PAFs are very expensive to replace, especially the good-looking ones with the date stamps and the brass screws and don't have any holes showing. As far as the routs underneath, as is typical with prehistorics, it's a short neck tenon. We've got an A mark as well as VCS for Vintage Cherry Sunburst, which is the color code. And the bridge pickup cavity has the familiar 3 stamping as well as somebody's girlfriend's name. That's right, that was a secret coding system apparently. I think that one's Sonia or something, or maybe even Sunny. Here you can see where the maple top joins onto the mahogany body, and this route just seems so extra deep. The depth is about 1.3 inches, where just by eyeballing it, I think most Les Pauls would probably be around that, because this is what our neck pickup cavity's at. It nearly looks to me like the maple cap might be thicker than usual. I measure approximately 0.6 inches. Our pickup reading's 7.72, and our bridge, neck at 7.52, and they play together at 3.81. Those are healthy Tim Shaws. But now let's talk the bridge and tailpiece. As we should have, it is a true Gibson ABR1. If you haven't watched my other prehistoric videos, just keep in mind, the regular Les Paul standard of the era was like multi-piece tops. They had Nashville-style bridges. They didn't have the dish carve that this one had. These were just such a breath of fresh air at that point in time, before the reissue craze became really insane. That's why I'm just so passionate about the prehistoric era of Gibson, because it was really a step in the right direction in general and birthed Gibson as we know it today, basically. But if you're ever working on an old 80s Gibson and you notice these little black spacers on the bridge, those are stock. That's not something that anybody added to it. I'm not exactly sure their function, but they just appear to be some sort of a black spacer. Maybe it makes adjusting your wheel easier. But it's very common for people to take those off and lose them. Even I'm guilty of it sometimes. So always cool to see one of those still have it. But there's your side profile shot, proving that yes, it is a post-mounted ABR1. No stud in the body, but these still utilize full weight tail pieces. As far as our controls over here, just regular volume, tone, one for each pickup. But as I was saying earlier, I love these ambered reissue knobs. They're my favorite knob Gibson has ever made because they have a nice metallicness to them and a very good see-through molasses brown at the top. Unfortunately, as they age, they start to smell like poop because the plastic is degrading. But as long as they're on the guitar, you don't notice it, but lock them up in a baggie, yeah, then you're gonna tell. This thing actually cleaned up quite beautifully. Now it's got a couple of nicks and dings. This was lovingly used is how I would put it. And you've got an impression mark right here, typical pickguard bracket indent, maybe a little bit over here too. But just check out the carve on this one. You can always tell it on these early prehistorics when they didn't quite know exactly what they were doing yet, but they wanted to make it more extreme. Sometimes they like to prove themselves better than others, and this one, it's good. Now, I'm not going to say this top is the craziest one we've ever seen, but it works well. It's very active, and that's why I think I'm going to hold on to this one. But I did find a funny story. Somebody who played this must have been a smoker, because if you look right there, you can see a very slight burn mark. Somehow that also transferred onto the backside of the pickguard, but the screw in that position also has a black head, so that must have been a minor mishap one day. Could have been much worse. But the pickguard itself, nothing too crazy over here. Everything appears to be original on the front. But now we can move on from our two-piece maple top and mahogany body to our mahogany neck and rosewood fretboard. Went ahead and cleaned that, conditioned it, polished those frets up. But you can see the acrylic trapezoid inlays. They have a very nice look to them in this era. That is a historically correct spec. But they've got the typical fret wire of this era. Not super tall, but not as flat as some of the other ones either. I measure a 1.7 inch nut width, creasing to 2.06 out the 12th. We've got a 0.83 first fret neck depth, and about 0.93 by the 10th. Those numbers make it seem a little bit larger than it is, but it does beef up there towards the heel. Here that is on the contour gauge, 1st fret and 12th fret, just a nice C shape. As far as fretboard radius, I measure 12 inches, and the tried and true 24 3/4 inch scale. But here's where heartbreak happened. When I started filming this and looking at the tuners and the serial, it's like, you know what? I think those have actually been replaced. Take a closer look, and also taking one off, yes, I can confirm. See that around there? That is a washer impression from a different style tuner being put on this. Or it also could just be from the washers on this particular one that weren't on the guitar straight from the factory. You always got to look very closely on this, because this is a style correct tuner that you should have, although usually you'll have some sort of a Gibson branding on it, but not always. Again, things are changing rapidly in this era. But this is somebody's attempt at a restoration. Now, what's kind of cool is it matches the original style, but it's actually a modern screw-on bushing rather than the push-in style. But yet, it still has a relatively small footprint, so I think you would trick most people on that if you were asking them, hey, what part on my guitar has been replaced? But our truss rod's good. If you're worried what all that glue is, that's just residue from putting our headstock veneer on. And the rod itself is in good shape and functions. And we have a blank truss rod cover that is original and nicely aged. Matches the aging of our nut too. There's our Les Paul model silkscreen and the end of the blocky Gibson logo as far as prehistorics. I kind of like it, but I could see why somebody might pass on this Japan run because they want the prehistoric style. But now we'll come on over to the backside, look in our control cavity. Unfortunately, it doesn't get a rimmed serial number. Those are always really cool to me, but everything is looking stock and original in here. That solder work looks decent. I suppose I could be convinced that that one was in and out, but I could go either way. But what I want to focus on are the pot dates. So that's 1378029, so that's the 29th week of 1980. This one's a bit too covered up to see. But then over here, it's 1981, the 35th week, with what looks like maybe an added solder drop right there, whereas that's definitely original. Then this one also matches. That's what you're looking for in this era, these two to match and these two to match. So I think we're good on that. However, Randy thought this one would have been made in January of 1983. Where did we see that? On the backside of the pickup. With this one 1000% being confirmed, not messed with, that makes sense. Because if it wasn't for those dates, I would probably say, okay, was this one actually made, mid-1981? They were probably just using old parts, and that is well documented. A lot of the 1983 Spotlight specials have 1980 pots here and 1983 over there. This one still has a shielding tin on it, but I noticed something interesting. This one wasn't secured when I first took it out, and then I lined them up and figured out why. Oh, it's broken. I don't know if it was broken from the factory or if it broke off in it. It's not rattling around in here or stuck, but something to know about. But now at first glance, after we cleaned it up, it looks very nice until you get it in the light. Then you can see a bunch of buckle worming and nicks and dings. It's mainly just worming marks though. So if you were to refinish the back of this, which I would not suggest, most of that would go away without even too much sanding. So that all just looks finished deep. So normally, as a collector, I tried not to have too beat up of examples, but when it comes to these prehistorics, I really just don't care about the condition as much, because remember, there's only so many of these and they were made to be played, and let's face it, these prehistorics are really nice guitars and I like to enjoy them. But there's a strap button at the bottom and the top that are the original style. Here's a quick peek at our toggle switch and another look at our thin binding in the cutaway. Extra thick. And then looking down here, we'll definitely have to blacklight that area. That could be sweat absorption, making the finish look a bit different. It could also be a minor overspray. I did notice a few weird looking anomalies over here by the neck joint, but I really don't think that's anything, but we'll find out. Otherwise, on the back of the neck, I just saw maybe a few minor impressions. Nothing too crazy. I left that tuner off just to prove that there weren't any like Schaller tuners or anything. No additional screw holes is what I'm talking about. So maybe somebody had reamed it for modern Clusons at some point and then switched them back to these slightly more vintage style. No line single rings. There's our Made in USA stamp and the N0039 serial number, putting this on the first half of the run. Now the blacklight test, everything's looking good on our headstock. Let's go up our neck. At our questioned area, yeah, that just must be some sort of a finish weird anomaly. I suppose this area could be a very minor touch-up, but since we don't have it all around the neck, I am not suspicious of anything like being broken ever. It was probably just a light finish chip, because that does happen there. Going over the back, everything looks fine to me. But whoa, some weird stuff over here. It looks like maybe there are some stickers or something on this at some point. So they have a little bit of a shadow right there. But maybe they actually spilled something around the bridge. That's what that looks like to me. But what's strange is you don't see any of this in regular lighting situations. Oh man, look! You don't normally see that either. That's a cool pickguard shadow. So I bet this was played as a pickguard off and on, and something was on this guitar at some point. But thankfully, no filled in screw holes. But this thing definitely saw some sun, that's for sure. But hey, it was in the land of the rising sun, so I guess it makes sense. All said and done, this one weighs 10 pounds, 2.6 ounces. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how it sounds. So far, I have to say the middle position, these two pickups work very well together. For the lead tones, I'd say that neck pickup does that the best. I like that gruntiness that neck has. Almost like slightly out of phase, but not exactly that. So there we go, the Nihon run of Prehistorics. What are my final thoughts? Is it necessarily better than any of the other ones that you can probably get much more readily available and cheaper? Nah, not really. This is one more so for collectors that want one of all the very early ones before the official launch of the Les Paul Reissue. Or somebody who's in the market for a prehistoric but wants, just a little bit extra to the tail behind theirs. The only other thing I noticed is the finish seems to be very thin on this guitar. Like on some of the outside B-roll shots, you can see the flame figuring standing proud in certain areas as well as the center seam line. And in Les Paul land, that's a good thing. This particular one wasn't really feeling it at first. It kind of sounded dead. I'm wondering if it's because I changed the strings that I used recently, so it'll take me a bit to get used to those. However, I did start to warm up to this one as the demo progressed and started to appreciate it for the tones that it did have. There was more mellow stuff hidden in this one. My favorite feature about this particular one though has to be the Gibson logo. It's not because it's blocky, but it's the mother of pearl styling. You can't really appreciate it while playing it or showing it to a friend, but when you're working on it on the workbench, this particular angle just makes it shine in such a beautiful way because it starts to reflect the light in a few areas a little bit brighter, and it just makes the Gibson logo look kind of cool. So I hope you enjoyed and learned something new, and we'll catch you guys tomorrow on the next one. Take care.